Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Spar&Brawl. Today, I don't have my co-host here, Sam, with me, but instead, I'm joined by Professor Gustavo Caetano-Anollés from the University of Illinois, who, along with his research partners, have studied the relationship between COVID-19 and seasonality. So, Gustavo, thank you very much for joining today. So, I'm just going to jump right into the first question. You start off your study by hypothesizing that COVID-19 is seasonal. Can you please first explain in layman's terms what it means for it to be seasonal, and then share some of the evidence that you found in support of your hypothesis?
Well, thank you very much for the invitation. It's a pleasure to be with you. We are interested in virus. We've been studying viruses for some time in my laboratory from a global perspective more than anything. But as soon as COVID-19 hit the world, we got really interested in exploring aspects of this disease. And we did this with students in my class, Bioinformatics and Systems Biology. So they all got really involved in this, and they worked very hard during the first half of this past year to see whether we could identify mutational patterns that were arising in the virus at that time by studying thousands of genomes and virus genomes. And also, we were interested in the possibility that the virus would be seasonal. And that could have some implications about the management of the disease. That's why that was an important question when we addressed this. So what is basically seasonality or the seasonal nature of a viral disease? Well, it's something that has been with us for a long, long time. It's part of the English vernacular. For instance, we talk about the flu season. So what is the flu season? Well, it's just the fact that during winter time, the disease, but it appears to be more severe. There are more cases, when you look at the epidemiology of a viral disease, if you see that there is a pattern related with climate, then obviously there may be a seasonal component, that variation that you see in epidemiological parameters that you may be studying. So it's a concept we are very familiar with. But what we do know is that not all viral diseases are seasonal. We know that the flu is seasonal, definitely, but one of the questions at the beginning of this pandemic was the COVID-19 virus, producing a disease that had this variation related to climate. So I don't know if that answers a little bit your question. In
No, I
general
think
terms.
that explains definitely the seasonality part, and congratulations to your students as well, by the way, for taking part of this study. And then, so what did you find in the case of COVID? Because as you mentioned, the flu is seasonal, but not all viruses are necessarily seasonal.
Well, there are several things that you need to do in order to test whether there is a seasonal pattern in any viral disease. The first thing that you should actually do is to determine whether some parameters that are related to climate, and this could be temperature, humidity, UV light levels. There's a number of things that you could test, basically, and see whether those parameters somehow are affecting the disease. Now, this is a difficult proposition. First of all, because how are you going to do this? You need to respect the changes, the climate changes that are occurring in regions of the world, for instance. So the approach that we took was to explore the epidemiology that was available at the time of our study, which was beginning of April, and temperature. We started with temperature as a easily accessible parameter that we could study. And so what we wanted to know is, at that time, this was the start of the pandemic. There were 211 countries that already had COVID-19 infections in them. Some of them, spreading very, very fast. We took the disease, luckily, at the peak of the first wave, and it coincided at that time with the variations that exist on a global scales in terms of temperature in the world. So that was fortuitous, but I think it was a good thing to have, that you would have that spike on cases on one side, and at the same time, the temperature variations at that time in April is maximal in the world. So we had the two aspects of the equation that were necessary in order to test this. The experimental setup was very simple. So we just calculated, number of cases, number of deaths, recovery rate, hospitalizations, all these things that we are very familiar now because they're being reported in the news easily. At that time, these were all new terms that we were learning globally, the population, isn't it? But we know that's the typical epidemiological parameters that you would study at the beginning. And so we took all of those, and we wanted to find if there was a correlation, a statistical correlation. That means a relationship in behavior of one parameter over another. So on one side we took temperature, and on the other side we took all these epidemiological parameters. And we also at that time looked at the actual latitude and longitude of each individual country. So we took all this data from the individual countries, the 211 that were at that moment infected by COVID-19, and we tested whether latitude was also a factor. And why latitude? Well, we know very well that temperature and latitude are highly correlated, isn't it? So as you travel towards the equator, temperature of countries, mean average temperature increases, isn't it? So so this is a global tendency, no matter what hemisphere you are located on. So that was our strategy: temperature of individual countries, temperatures of individual states, because we did this also in the analysis at the focusing only on the United States, and also latitude and longitude. So why longitude? Well, it's a factor that shouldn't be correlated, isn't it? Because there shouldn't be variations of temperature with longitude unless you are exploring areas that have a lot of lot of water in them, like middle of ocean. Then the temperature will drop. Or if you are high in the mountains, then the temperature will increase. So there are some variations of that type in climate that are important, but we simplified things by just taking the average temperature of a country, that it's available data, easily available data, and seeing whether there was a correlation. And indeed, we find a correlation that was statistically significant between all these epidemiological parameters and both temperature and latitude. So well, that was very important, because as soon as we had that as an outcome, then we started asking questions. Well, could this be related to perhaps management practices or nutritional status of the population, or whether there are morbidities in individual countries? Perhaps there are some countries that have more, more incidence of a number of diseases that could be problematic, that would increase the incidence of COVID-19. But we did not find any. So that means that that at least during this first spike of the disease, this first wave, I would say, of the disease, those aspects were not impinging on the correlation that we were finding with temperature and latitude, and lack of correlation, of course, with longitude. So.
Okay, so does that mean, so you said that you picked the period of April 15 when there was the highest differences. So that means countries where at the time the weather was warmer, they would have had perhaps a higher level of more COVID-19 cases and morbidity, whereas, countries where the temperature was lower, and countries
Was
where the
lower.
temperature was higher at this time, on average, they had less cases, less deaths after you had controlled for all these other variables.
Yeah. That was the expectation,
Mm-hmm.
exactly, and that's what the correlation is somehow telling us, that that is indeed the case. Going back to why we chose April as a good time to do this, it turns out that because of global change, there have been a number of studies that have been looking at climate and how climate is being affected by ozone levels or many other factors that are important for global change these days. And it turns out that beginning in April, that's where the differences in temperature between these different countries or different locations in the world are maximal. So that means that's the ideal time really to make this kind of analysis. And luckily it coincided with the fact that we were having this big wave of infections occurring. So you need to also have enough infections, enough cases, so that you can have enough data points to make that correlation feasible from a statistical point of view. So yeah, that was why that was an important aspect.
Yeah, so you actually did your study later than this, but that was actually the perfect point and day to
Well,
take the data.
at that
Yeah.
time, that was the well, we started harvesting data and so on. That was important at that time. Of course, now we should repeat all this. That was we should repeat all this study now with millions of cases all over, isn't it? So please understand that at that time there were 3 million cases worldwide and only 150,000 deaths. So just look at what is happening only in the United States today, and when we relate that first initial wave that we were looking at, and now this second or third wave that we are now experiencing. So yes, in April of this next year, that would be a good time to do a second analysis, and test indeed if we continue to see all these correlations that we saw during the first wave.
And what about the fall? Would the fall would have been a good time or
Well,
no?
it's not the maximal the temperatures, but yes, you could eventually do it all throughout the year if you would
Yes, of
want,
course.
isn't it? And you would see whether there are some variations in the correlations. That could be done too, but of course it's a lot of effort. This took. We got the data and everything very early. A couple of months after the analysis, which was in April. We had everything ready, but it took time for publication because it needs to go through the vetting system of science. So that took months basically for this paper to be accepted and so on in the journal Evolutionary Bioinformatics. So. Yeah.
Okay, and so why is the case? What are the different mechanisms of the season that affect the spread of coronavirus?
Well, it's a very complicated question because even though it seems so easy to ask why, but the problem is that the viral diseases could be affected by a number of factors, isn't it? Like for instance, we know very well because we've learned through COVID-19 that this is a respiratory disease, isn't it? It spreads through these little fomites that are, these little particles that go in the air, and some of them are easily spreadable. Others are they lie there, for only some few minutes. We don't know whether the temperature and the climate conditions like humidity could affect their viability in the air, for instance, or it could be that they are there, but they can be exposed to radiation, more UV light during the summertime, may kill them easily. So that's one of the theories that has been proposed. Their temperature also affect viral variability, and we know that because there have been studies on COVID-19 actually on this. So this would be a group of factors that we can call them environmental factors that affects the virus directly. So you would say, okay, well, if you have less virus in the environment because of all this, or it could be behavioral. And during the winter time, we're inside and close environments, and that's ideal to spread disease because humans will have more interaction with each other during that time. So it could be just the fact that we as humans have a behavior that could increase the chances of having more viral contacts occurring, isn't it? So now we could also consider the issue more at a physiological level. Let's say, as humans, we have an immunological system that defends against diseases in general. Whether they're bacterial or viral, it doesn't matter. We do have a good system of control of diseases. And but that system, that immunity, changes with the seasons too. There is evidence that for instance, nutritional status, temperature changes the way how our immune system works. There is evidence for that. So there is also evidence that vitamin D, for instance, which is fundamental to produce a number of proteins, small little proteins that help us against disease. That vitamin D is not produced in our bodies because we don't have enough UV exposure during the winter time. So that could be also a factor for that seasonality. So there is a number. That's why the why is difficult to answer.
Mm-hmm.
It's easy to ask the question, is it seasonal? And we can say yes, because our study has shown that. But then if you start asking, okay, why? Then we have that just atomizes in thousands of possible experiments, each of them providing some information about this. So we do have some insights on COVID-19 that have been coming during all this year that can help us in that realm. So.
That's very interesting. So this is a bit irrelevant, but I'm guessing for the flu and influenza, we have similar theories as why we think it's seasonal. Yes. It's probably as hard to pin down exactly why.
Yeah, if you want to go really in detail, you could then go and study, how the interferon system, is affected by COVID-19 versus the flu. In both cases, there's a number of proteins that the virus has that are mimics. They mimic the kind of the proteins that we produce in our bodies to fend against viral diseases, and one of them is the interferon system. And so yes, we could go directly and study that. That would be a study at the molecular level and so on. But we could also do the study of of society and how society behaves during winter time and how that could affect viral exposure, or our preferences on masking and things of the sort, which are even political at this time, which is really awfully sad that would be the case. But so yes, all these are studies that are needed to understand in a better way that seasonality phenomenon. So,
in your study, you were able to control more or less for some of these things, such as lockdowns or masks, or since it was in the beginning of the pandemic and you had the entire world as a sample, you didn't quite need to.
Well, in a way, that helped us avoid some of the problems that probably a study today we will have, because at that time, the political influence was not important so much, at least, and not at least globally, because remember, this is a global study.
And no one wore masks, for instance, except maybe Asian countries.
Yes, people were learning, and they were already in Europe, the immediate recommendation, especially in Italy and so on. So you need to understand that at that time, the main countries were Italy, Iran, and the US was just starting to have this spike. And then in 1 month, everything developed. It was a single month. And during that month, there were immediate country lockdowns. In all the countries, the vast majority of them shut their borders. So that was good for the study. Let me tell you why. Because one complicating factor is if all countries would have left all their borders open, then the influence on epidemiological parameters could be just migration. You know, if you would have people coming from another country bringing all the disease, then that would have compromised the data of individual countries subjected to that. But the vast majority of countries at that time, in one way or another, they had partial or total border closures that help basically isolate that problem in the study. So, yeah.
Okay, and so you found that COVID-19 was seasonal. So how come countries such as Brazil, a country which on average has quite warm temperatures all year round, how could it have been hit so hard? It's almost, I think, second or third in terms of all kinds of stats.
Yes, well, let's revisit a little bit the seasonal effect also, isn't it? Saying that it's seasonal doesn't mean that during the summer you don't have flu. You do, but you do have it at lower levels. And because we have vaccines against the flu and so on, in some way we are kind of controlling the disease, isn't it? With COVID-19, that did not occur. The disease was rampant, and especially here in the United States, it was rampant in Brazil, and it was rampant in Russia and in other places. And so, and that somehow is a complicating factor for seasonality too, isn't it? The good thing is that in our study, we caught the phenomenon relatively early, you know, so Brazil was not an important player during that time, you know, and when it became a player, the infection started in areas of Brazil that were rather south, isn't it? São Paulo is at high elevation, and it's relatively south compared to the equator, compared to other parts of Brazil. And it was exactly there where the big bang occurred and so on. And now it's massive. And of course, the political aspect there, you know, the country that did not react quickly to the disease, you know, that took important effects later on, meaning that during the summertime, during the summertime, our summertime, the levels of the virus never went down, even here in the United States. In Brazil, it was the opposite. They were in the winter time, so that there was you know, they had the highest swaths of that country now a higher temperature, a lower temperature than, which is you know, the risky proposition of seasonalities, and so that helped develop the boom, the Brazilian boom, basically, in terms of COVID-19.
You just mentioned the United States, and your study kind of had two parts. So one was the global analysis when you compared all the countries, and then you also studied the US specifically, and I'm guessing you compared each state. Or I'm not sure. Can you please explain, yes, what did you find in the case of the US?
We did this analysis too because we were quite interesting, and we had quite a number of cases already unfolding throughout the country. But at that time, the cases were fundamentally located in the east and west coasts of the country, and so yeah, we were looking for a latitude effect and a temperature effect, and we had latitude and temperatures of each state. We selected those values from the capital locations of each state, and it turns out that we couldn't find any correlation. So what we found at the world level was not possible to find at the US level. And I think our explanation to this was that perhaps it was the way how the disease expanded in the US. because the interesting thing is that we did find a correlation with longitude, which was our negative control. We shouldn't have a correlation with longitude, but we did. And it makes sense because, look, the spread of the disease, the incidence was longitudinally distributed, isn't it? So we had it in the East Coast and the West Coast, not much in the middle states. So that probably forced for us to see a positive correlation in our epidemiological variables. So yeah.
I see. Okay. Very interesting. So thank you. I have a final question that's in two parts for you. So based on your findings, what can you concretely suggest as when perhaps COVID could hit different countries harder? So of course you said seasonality, just one aspect. It doesn't totally go away, but when could it hit harder, let's say in the US or perhaps in Europe, which has been a hotbed, or some Asian countries? If you could just give two or three examples. And finally, what do you think policymakers and governments could make of your findings?
Well, understanding that the COVID-19 disease is seasonal is important. And that's why we need more and more work on this, so that additional studies will confirm these findings. This is how science works. But it's necessary because as soon as the world starts controlling the COVID-19 disease, then cases worldwide are going to go down, and then we are going to equate the disease, the coronavirus disease, as the flu, isn't it? So with the flu, we permanently deploy new vaccines every year, isn't it? So we are waiting for the vaccine to come out, and then it's recommended the population will have the flu vaccine. Why? Because this is a way to control the spread of the disease and have it on check. That's the ideal situation that we need to reach with COVID-19. Once we control that disease and the cases go completely down, then the waves are going to be much smaller, and the vaccines are going to control those waves in a much effective way. So knowing that we have a seasonal phenomenon is important, because if we do have a seasonal phenomenon, then that helps us and helps the individual countries work on their vaccines during the summertime, which is what we need to do, isn't it? We need to develop new vaccines. And now we have the RNA vaccines that are being deployed very, very quickly, but they have to go through, as you know, as we've experienced in the news, they have to go through vetting, through different organizations in different countries that will accept or not whether that vaccine doesn't have any side effects or any problems. So, and that takes time. So if seasonality was not there, then the virus is not giving us a break to develop the new vaccines. And vaccines will be necessary to be developed. And we know why, because you know all the problems of the variants, the mutations that occur. The larger the pandemic, the worse it gets, because the virus produces so many changes, so many mutations, that changes the ability of the vaccine to act on the virus. So that's why I think, from a management point of view of any disease, it's important to know whether it's seasonal or not. If it's seasonal, it helps us combat it. If it's not, then we can have a disease that is protracted and difficult to tackle. Like, for instance, HIV has been a problem because we don't have a vaccine yet, isn't it? We have treatments, but not a vaccine. So depending on what is the virus, then we have ways to combat that virus, and that's why I feel that we need to learn much more about how the virus behaves in the environment, in relation to our immunological system, and many other factors. So.
Okay,
I
well,
hope
thank
that
you very
answers your
much.
question.
No, it
So,
definitely does. And I'm not into natural sciences or anything like that. And I think I've understood. So I'm hoping our viewers will also be able to understand. So thank you again. It was very interesting, and congratulations to you and your students. So I guess in a way, maybe the moral story can be that the fact that it's seasonal is good news. I mean, in multiple ways, also just in the way of managing and being able to get ready for when COVID can hit harder, which will be just like the flu season, I guess, if there's more evidence that comes out that it is really seasonal.
yes, yeah, I think you summarize it very well. Yes, indeed. I think it is a good news uh, in the long term. The bad
Hmm.
news is that we have this incredible wave that is hitting us, and there's so many deaths. That's the bad news. But I think the fact that we have a vaccine coming, many vaccines coming our way, and that at some point we will be able to bring down all these values, then everything will come to normality. And there are two outcomes that we should expect. One would be that we can, eliminate the disease completely, and I don't know whether that will be possible, or whether the disease will be like the flu, that it will be permanently with us, and we have to, add that to the arsenal of vaccines we'll have to give ourselves, every year. So,
Okay, perfect. Thank you so much, Gustavo,
cool.
for joining us.
Thank
And
you
thank you.
for the opportunity to tell a little bit about our research and that of our students that work on this so hard. So thank
Thank you
you.
very much, and congratulations to your students as well. And if you like this video, please make sure to like and subscribe, and we'll see you in our next video. Thank you.